Alright guys, so fair to say I'm pretty bloody proud to stand up here and get a chance to speak at a very conference I organised. I think that is so cool. And notwithstanding that, to an amazing audience who generally speaking, you guys have been so supportive, so welcoming, so loving. I must have met about 120 people from the Sydney testing industry from January till June. I think I was averaging 1 or 2 meetings per day with a tester from Sydney to try and get this up and running. So thank you all. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet everyone, and I've loved every minute, and hopefully this is a cool little presentation. I've tried to put a bit of a unique spin on it and take it back to a real journey. So I do currently work as the QE practice lead at Bunnings. So first and foremost, I love my family, and I believe in family first, and I say that to all my team members as well. We're moving back to mandatory office, but as far as I'm concerned, if there's something going on with family, or if you're not 100% well, stay at home and take care of yourself. Software testing, you guys know that. Building community events like testing talks, absolutely. I love a bit of financial and investing discussion as well. I used to be quite frequent at a few of those types of clubs back in Melbourne. I do love my AFL. I'm a Brisbane fan because Fitzroy merged with Brisbane a long time ago, and I stuck with them, and luckily they were a good team when I was in high school. And basketball. What a surprise, I know. I do love my basketball, and my height has come in handy for that. So a few key takeaways I'm hoping to deliver from this discussion. I want to talk about overcoming resistance to change, articulating the value proposition, fostering a culture of collaboration, nurturing a sense of ownership, handling challenges and pitfalls, and empowering the team. A little bit of a look back to 2017 when I first joined Tabcorp. This was kind of what, at a very high level, as you guys know, what I was walking into. So there was kind of me as the QE lead. We had 2 manual testers. We had 2 QEs embedded in those digital teams, and something called flexi testers, which fortunately they don't have now. It was a weird model, hard to work with, but it was basically a regression team of testers that kind of were spat at different projects around Tabcorp. We didn't really have any unit testing. The devs were very old school. They'd been at the company a long time, and they generally speaking didn't really do unit testing. We had a few tests on one project, and that was just done by one of the testers for a bit of fun, just to check it out, try out some automation testing. We had 1 mock server on a project, but it was actually built by a developer to test some of the jackpots on Keno, because obviously you're not going to want to test that in a real world where you've got to play it 10 million plus times. Around 100 tests executed daily, which was pretty much those 10 tests. And fair to say, our regressions were long and heavily manual. So a little bit of a look back to 2020 as well. So a couple of years later, 3 years later, we kind of moved to 1 QA lead still, but we had 16 QEs. We had all our QEs embedded, and we got rid of the flexi testing model. We didn't lose any tested jobs, which is what we want. They were just converted into embedded QEs. Tens of thousands of unit tests. We really worked with the engineers on establishing a culture there, and luckily we had a great engineering lead join around the same time as me that was equally passionate. Over 3,000 E2E automation tests, which I know it's funny to just say 3,000 tests across 16 projects. What does that even mean? But I'll dig into those numbers a little bit deeper soon. We had 6 mock servers, and 12 of the 16 digital projects were actually leveraging mocking. And for those that do use mocking here, like we've heard about from David, one of the beauties of mocking is that you can have a single mock server across multiple platforms. So you can have a Keno mock server that is actually servicing Keno Web, Keno iOS, Keno Android, and we really unlock the benefits of that. Over 20,000 automation tests ran daily in CI, and naturally the actual regression was trending down at that point, which was great. So the way I wanted to do it was I wanted to kind of take you back to where I first started at Tab and kind of take you through a bit of the journey. I've put some photos down there, which is a bit of a throwback to pre-COVID when I guess we were taking tons of team photos every single day. But it's actually really kind of cool going back for all the photos we took for the different newsletters and things you'll hear about here today as well. So I started at Tabcorp actually as a contractor. So before I became the QE lead, I was via a consultancy called Odyssey, and it was a new project. The project started as a team of 5, and we were blessed to have a very talented graduate engineer. And I'll speak more to why he was such an asset to that team soon. We decided that we would build an automation framework executing a test in CI on the first feature developed in the first week. Just a page title. But the reason we made that decision is we thought, let's start the show early. It's just going to be a page title, it's going to be a single test in CI, but let's get it going from the start of the project and showcase that to the business so we can start getting them on the journey with us. We did a showcase for the business who brought Odyssey in, And even though it was just a page title, they were impressed. We began to learn more about the application we were building, and we actually learned that, and I didn't know right away, like it was kind of a top secret thing at first, that we were building a terminal system that would actually process all bet types on track at Tabcorp, which was really fascinating software because terminal systems, if you've ever been down the track, are generally operated by people over the age of 65. So you can't have a lot of changes, it can't be very complex, you've got to have a pretty straightforward system that doesn't change visually over time, which some of the people might be salivating a little bit. Obviously a great candidate for test automation. So now a large team and with a real project and a defined tech stack. At this point we knew it was going to be Angular, we knew it was going to be JavaScript. We met to discuss the future architecture of the framework. So before we go into that, why does automation architecture matter? Well, these are a few of the things our team came up with. So we believe the architecture of the framework should enable our most technical and non-technical team members. It's easy to maintain and update over time. Low complexity code that is not intimidating to fresh eyes. Enables best practice iterations on the framework, both architectural and code. And a consistent architecture approach supports training, pairing, skilling up across teams. And finally, low code, easy to reuse. And I'll touch base on that more. This is 100% a coded solution, so don't mistake it for a no-code solution like a Ghost Inspector or anything like that. We just believe in having as least code as possible. So we started multiple POCs, or proof of concepts, to build a generic automation framework. When we say generic, we wanted to come up with a framework approach that you could effectively use on any system. And that was because although we only had a single project, we had some discussions and found out on the grapevine that none of the projects at Tab really had any test automation, and that a lot of their stack were all in the JavaScript space. So a lot of Angular, a lot of JavaScript. And if we could actually build something pretty cool here, maybe later we could share that into other parts of the business. Very early thoughts on that, but we just knew that was the scene we walked into, and we were looking to impress. For Odyssey especially, it was the first time into Tabcorp. And for me personally, like I always try to join a company and really kick some big goals, and I was new at Odyssey as well. So we made a decision as a team to move forward with Cucumber, Protractor, and JavaScript. So Protractor now obviously pretty much dead in the water. The new hotness automation framework at that time for sure. Everyone was kind of talking about it. If you went on the npm.js, where you actually get these packages, it was the #1 most downloaded framework at that time alongside Selenium. And obviously, because we were working with an Angular application, we thought JavaScript. Now the Cucumber part, I'll dig into a bit more later, but that was really an architectural decision. We didn't do it because we wanted to have great BDD and tie it up to our BA requirements. We used it because we wanted to build a framework. We could effectively copy and paste steps across different projects and the framework would still work. And I'll dig much more into that in due course. So the importance of the proof of concept. Who here has done a proof of concept at work? Yeah. And for me, like, it's an incredibly important tool. It's something you can show something quick, get some buy-in, tell people, show people it's actually going to work. But really, for us, it was about understanding supported features. Does it support iframes, for example? Building team buy-in, getting as many team members on the journey as possible. Love to get as many as we can in. Some frameworks cater better to certain software. Things like long forms, scroll. Who here has used Selenium and had scrolling issues? I know I have. Architectural discussions around framework design and architecture. Quick wins, generate some momentum, seeing something built, and measure and review, choose the best framework for the job. This was something very important. I feel like it was one of the best decisions I made in those early days, and it was to work hand in hand with the engineers from conception. And I really challenged them to review our pull requests and provide ideas to improve the framework. They became co-owners of the framework, and I'll be honest, I used some more probably dirty language, but I basically told them to gut the framework. Kill it, shred it, be as nasty as you want to be, but we're going to build a framework together, and I want you to be on the pull request and just tell me how shit it is, basically. Like, that's what I really wanted, because one, if they're really going in with that mentality, they're getting buy-in themselves because they're looking deep at the code, they're trying to really plug holes in it. And then also, it's getting them into the code, they're committing, they're contributing to the framework. So that's something I've taken to jobs in the future as well. It's always like, get everyone into it. So after that, we started to build out our automation framework and made it part of our definition of done to add E2E tests for any new features. Obviously, on an established project, much more challenging. But this was a new project, small team, almost like a startup, building out of a small space at Tab. They actually put us in a place called the Dungeon. Yeah, it was on level 6. It was real dark and it was real tight. And on like hot days, it was like a sauna. And that's literally where they put their new consulting team. Anyway, we got out of the dungeon. But if anyone here has been at Tabcorp, they'll know what I mean. It was just a very specific area. They put new teams. So, our graduate engineer decided to build a standalone mock server because our automation kept failing due to unstable test environment. And this was a game changer. I'll admit, this was not on my mind at all in that early stage of the project. But when we got our first few tests up and running and they were constantly failing because of a horrible environment, this guy, and we're talking, he was like 22 at the time. He just went in and built this amazing mock server, standalone node mock server, stubbed out all the track data, managed to pull that in through various scripts, and basically created this mock server that we could use from pretty much day dot. There's more to this guy as well, but the reason I bring him up and why I'm building him up is because, as far as I know, he was one of the youngest guys to ever get actually basically pulled across to Facebook. So he's overworking at Facebook now, and he's rose really quickly, but an incredibly talented guy. And I should have known, because when I met him, I sat next to him like, hey, just trying to get to know each other a bit. And he told me how he spends like every night at home working on consulting projects himself. So he literally would just go home and spend 5 hours working on all these different projects all around the world for different people, as well as doing his 9 to 5. So yeah, special guy, loved what he did. So I pushed hard for automation to be included in all our sprint showcases to the business. I wanted automation to be the last part of the showcase so we should finish with a bang. Yeah, so we had some pretty famous showcases at Tab. I used to go in with the most energy I could generate. Like if you guys think I'm producing a solid energy right now, I'm probably at around 75%. I was taking 100% to those showcases because I knew the audience weren't like you guys. They weren't testers that understood this stuff. They were general managers, people that had never seen test automation, didn't understand the value from it, and I really felt like I had to pump them up. I'd come up with stories, come up with metaphors, I'd quote movies, whatever it took to get these guys smiling, laughing, and actually bought into this stuff. And what I noticed, and what still exists today, is that the people that were coming along to those showcases, every showcase we got more and more business people, because they'd heard there was this crazy passionate guy that would get absolutely amped up about test automation at the end of every showcase, to the point that some of the general managers there would be literally, when I'd stand up to speak to test automation, they would be like, this is the best part, like just because they knew it was going to be so crazy. So that's what I was going for, and that's what we achieved. So Cucumber. Cucumber's, it's one of those things. It inspires a lot of debate. Some testers love it. Some testers hate it. Some engineers think it's a disaster. Some engineers love it. But for us, as I say, it went back to the architecture side of it. For us, we felt that Cucumber led to a shorter learning curve, particularly because if you're a non-technical tester and there's a well-engineered framework with Cucumber on the front, it's relatively easy to just sort of get stuck into writing some tests, whether it's just copying and pasting some steps. We also felt like creating a generic framework meant simple code. It meant easy code, something quick to run. And for us, that meant that the younger junior guys would more easily adapt to it. And also for me at the time, as the single engineer on this, the single test engineer on this project, it meant that I could rapidly create tests as well. So that was why we kind of went with Cucumber at the time. And as you'll see in this prezzo, it becomes more and more mature, our approach there. So we started to make waves around Tabcorp for how well our test automation CI/CD was supporting fast feedback and quality. So particularly developers running their tests on pull requests, seeing that fast feedback. That was something completely new around Tab. More importantly for business as well, the project was delivered within deadline with a high level of coverage across the test pyramid operating in CI. And like I said, because it was a terminal system, it basically meant that we could automate a high level of coverage and not have to worry about constantly refactoring the test. So we could actually go in there and really say we're going to try and get 90% automation coverage, because we knew the way you placed a bet wasn't going to change. We could literally build up 500, 600, 700 tests for that application, And we had no concern at all that we were going to have to do a massive refactor of the test. It just literally never changed the UI once it was a designed and agreed upon system. They took this stuff so seriously at Tab, the proof of concepts for the design concepts were actually tested with the terminal workers before we even began construction of the application. So they knew what they were getting and we weren't really able to change it, which was really interesting side of engineering as well. So towards the conclusion of the project, the head of digital asked if I could do what basically we did in Green Moon across Tabcorp, and a new role was created at Tabcorp, and that's how I became the QE practice lead at Tabcorp. So that was sort of the early days of how I got stuck into Tab. And the key learnings for me was building relationships. You know, I really tried to work hard to create relationships with the engineers, our entire team, and the business. We constantly did showcases, and I can't recommend a good showcase enough. The power of that, you've seen the evidence. Proof of concept, anything and everything. You know, if you've ever got stuck at work and you feel like you need to actually make a change, it's not enough to just do a talk and talk about how great it's going to be. You produce a real proof of concept, and if it's a better solution, the majority of the team will get on board, even the engineers. Developer buy-in, we should be on this journey hand in hand together as engineers. Momentum, you know, we're constantly building great things. We're producing awesome results. We're generating great value. You've got to show it. You've got to constantly be showing what we're doing. Not only does it build momentum with business, but it builds momentum within your own team. So a new era then begins. So we started out by exploring the existing landscape of projects and checking out the code across a few applications. We quickly learned that we were close to a blank slate on the test automation front. Suddenly I began to realise why all our showcases were so powerful. So we had a bit of an idea, but I think when I got that role, I really noticed like we were square one. And the stuff we were doing in showcases really was extreme. Like we were like just completely different ballgame to what was happening in every other space at Tab, except for Tab Digital in Sydney. We weren't really well close to them. They were probably doing some really amazing stuff, but at this point, at least in my juncture at Tab, we hadn't got to know them. But they're responsible for basically tab.com.au and the apps, and Melbourne is responsible for everything else, just for a little bit of extra context. So basically decided to focus on the applications with the same tech as our Odyssey project, so React, to get some runs on the board. And this is key, you know, new role, QE practice lead, how do we get some runs on the board? I had no intention of going into core systems or an area I didn't understand and trying to play in there right away. I felt like my job was to replicate what we'd done in Green Moon as best we could everywhere else in the business. So I focused on same technology applications to get some runs on the board. Started to demo and showcase our achievements across the broader Tabcorp team and develop relationships. So we leaned on Green Moon. I would take that across projects, showcase what we did, and really just prove that, hey, we've done some great stuff. Maybe if we work together, we can do some great stuff here as well. And we found that Kino Web had a starting point for automation testing. You'll remember those 10 tests. We did a demo with the team, and they thought that basically our framework approach could work for them, but they definitely wanted proof. There was an embedded QE there that had been there a long time. He was very passionate about that small suite of tests he'd recently built. And so he was like, you know what, I've put some work into this, but let's proof of concept it, which we absolutely loved. And we did a proof of concept, the team made a decision, and we decided to go with a relatively similar approach to what we'd done in Green Moon, mainly because the framework he had built he kind of built in silo, it was bare bones, it was quite hard to understand for other testers, and so he was actually on board with the idea that it would be great to have a more consistent framework, more team members can understand. So we replicated the framework in Kino Web and worked, as in literally joined the team as a tester to build and embed the same frameworks. Yeah, so this was key. I didn't see my role as QE practice lead to be just a leader, as in people leader, delegating. I really saw my role as being on the tools with the team in the trenches, kicking some goals. That was my approach. I didn't feel any pressure to have to be across everything from day one. The head of digital didn't expect that. He just expected me to go in and do great things with teams. So with that mentality, I joined these teams as a tester. Literally joined their sprint plannings, went to their retros, and actually picked up cards just like any other tester, because that's all I am. And generally speaking, that was why we got so much momentum, because they saw me as in the trenches with them on the journey, not dictating to them, but actually getting in there, getting stuck into it, and moving forward. And personally, I love that too. Like, I didn't want to be off the tools. I wanted to be on the tools, doing cool stuff, and so it all fed in really well as well. So we had introduced brown bags and automation sinks, just to sort of stimulate a bit of culture around Bunnings. And we had this idea, like, why not build a single framework? So we were presenting at an automation sync about how we had now managed to leverage this automation framework across 3 projects, Form, Green Moon and Kino. When our engineering lead asked a very common sense question, why don't you just have this framework across as one single framework across all projects instead of having the exact same framework, effectively almost a copy and paste in each of those 3 projects? Let's build a common framework. So that's what kicked us off on this idea of having this npm.js module that we could effectively put in the npm.js, install as a node module that would contain all the generic architecture of the framework. And on the top of that, we'd have our customized layer in the cucumber, the definitions, so the definitions found in your page in order to automate different elements and assert, etc., as well as anything that might need to do with mocks and test data. As you can see, our step definitions, completely generic, completely general. You had general steps, form steps, navigation steps, and these steps would work across any React application in the world. You'll see a few of the steps, they look so old now. It's almost like legacy, isn't it? Seeing JavaScript and sort of protractor back in the day. Ooh, protractor. But this is pretty much what it looked like. As you can see, that's a step that could work on any form, any React application. You can fill in the blah input with the blah. You fill in the username input with the username. And then navigation steps, I'm on the page, would work on any React application. Page definitions, this was probably the secret sauce of the original common framework we built, is that we put data IDs and worked with the engineers hard on this, obviously, as well, to get data IDs as a consistent data attribute across the entire application for all these applications. And then we could simply define all our data IDs inside our page definitions. And then if you're on the login page and you want to click on the login button, you would effectively find a login button definition inside your login page JSON. And that was effectively our type of page model that we had in place, page object model. Once we got our new common framework into Kino Web with a mock server and in CI/CD, I started to think this method could be applied across projects. So joining each project as a tester, attending agile functions, picking up cards, becoming a certified team member, and focusing on replicating the above again and again, among other leadership duties. Our team was growing at that time, so I had my own leadership duties, report lines, frequent catch-ups, all that sort of stuff, as well as running all the agile forums, and to be honest, trying to look at test strategy and process, which needed significant improvement as well. But over the period of 2 years, we had a single common framework in CI/CD on a mock server across Kino Web, Green Moon, Form, AML, EBT, Sun Vegas, and Sun Casino, and we felt like we were just getting started. But that was all the React applications that we had at that time. We had this single framework, and we had a lot of tests, and all the teams were using it. And the best bit was, and the proof of the pudding is, if anyone's got their phone, they can actually go to the npm.js and actually see the framework still in operation today. I think I have a slide on that, but boy, did we share it. Fair to say we were really excited about what we were doing with the common framework and what we're doing across respective projects, but we wanted to keep that culture of showing it. So we introduced things like automation reports, newsletters, a whole bunch of things, highlights, and these kind of things would go out monthly just to consistently pump up all the great stuff we were doing. And I know I'm going to speak to that a bit, and you guys can obviously detect that I'm really about that. But when I joined, as I say, it was sort of 2 testers, then it was 16, then it was 54, and after 5 years at Tabcorp, technically there was 112 QEs at Tab, all of which technically were reporting into me, but we made a big change on that because it's ridiculous. So we got the QEs reporting into their delivery leads because 112 report lines just sound silly. But you can see the expansion, the investment that comes from constantly showing the value you're delivering. So what did I learn again? Some consistent themes. Leader on the tool. I have a lot of respect for leaders that get on the tools, and I believe if I respect that, I should be doing it myself. And so I generally am trying to commit code, get involved, get on the tools, and do cool stuff in the testing space all the time. Showcases. open to ideas. You know, it might sound like I've just been pushing this common framework, but really the whole time I was trying to collaborate and get ideas and improve things. And one of the things I loved about a common framework was that our best people could commit something really cool to it and everyone would benefit from it. That lad, the young lad that went off to Facebook, I always remember in the early days he pushed this amazing retry function that was so much better than the native retry function in Reactor, and that benefited all the 8 projects all at once. So all those projects just became so much more stable running their automation pretty much overnight. We continued to POC. Every project we POC'd. We always proved ourselves first, got the team on board before we moved forward. We never forced our way in. And passion. I think that was something as well. You got to have the passion for what you're doing and build passion in others. And by constantly being passionate about testing myself and what we were trying to achieve in automation testing, I felt like others got on board that journey as well. So what became of the CAF? You know, this is what 2020 I'm talking about. It's 2023 now. So what became of it? Well, I did a Google of it the other day and I realized they're still actually downloading it 100 times a week at Tabcorp, which is a good thing in that obviously it was a great framework and at its peak it was across 12 projects. But then it's also a bad thing in that now that I've left, they're clearly not updating it. Like if I was there, I can guarantee there probably would have been a common framework version 3 and it wouldn't have been Reactor because Reactor is obviously no longer being updated, it's getting old. So we most likely would have moved to Playwright or a Cypress or something else. So, you know, we did build this framework. It did have a lot of tests. It was stable in CI. It had buy-in from over 100 team members across digital, but perhaps it almost had too much buy-in and obviously at least some single point of failure in me because I still get messages from people at Tabcorp asking for help from time to time. And also requesting advice, which is totally understandable because over the period of the last 2 or 3 years, a massive amount of that team's left. Tabcorp went through a big demerger, they've had a restructure, a lot of the QEs have moved on. I'll be honest, I've poached a few of the best ones over to Bunnings. These things happen, things change. So, you know, it's something to think about is that, okay, yes, it was very successful, but it still had its downsides as well in the future. So joined Bunnings and applied a similar approach once again, a real focus on architecture. The team were actually using a non-code automation tool called Ghost Inspector. Has anyone heard of that? Ghost Inspector? I'd never heard of it either, so you're an odd one out, mate, but I felt the exact same way. I'd never heard of it. But because they didn't have any genuine real passion for building a framework from scratch, they didn't have someone sort of leading that space, they were doing Ghost Inspector. And they had a great suite of tests, to be completely respectful. It was about 400 odd tests, big regression suite, all running in Ghost Inspector. And particularly their non-technical testers were doing really well in that tool. There was a massive appetite though, and I think a big part of the reason I was brought in to have an embedded code solution. Because this was a non-code solution, they were really just using it to run on regressions, triggering it manually. You know, they didn't have all the great stuff we just talked about, fast feedback, automation on pull requests, mock servers, and a lot of the stuff that they felt like they really needed to build into it to get the squads embedded and getting the value from test automation. So I went in and I did a proof of concept with the team, and I had no idea which framework we should use, but I knew that we should try some of the best and see what actually works best. I'd never used Playwright. This was in the early days. Playwright barely was being used at that time. It was a new framework. Microsoft had popped it out. I didn't really even know anyone using it. But what I will say is, thank God we did a POC. And we did the exact same POC framework in all those 3, and we learned something. Every single tester in there and engineer thought Cypress was going to be the easy winner going into that POC. Great framework, works really well. What we learned though was the Bunnings website has a lot of hanging services in the back, a lot of old tech debt that's being fixed now by that local team. And generally speaking, just the home page, you could be looking at over a minute of lagging services. Cypress, you can get around it with some different hacks and things like that, as a lot of people here will know. But generally speaking, it was not built out of the box to deal well with a website that has that going on in the back. Not only that, this website had a lot of hidden iframes, and Cypress doesn't deal well with that without a fair few little hacks as well. So by doing that POC, we realized Playwright was the clear standout for that application. Exactly the same framework, exactly the same test. The only thing different was the Selenium and Playwright, and I'll touch on that a bit more in a second. Invited the top engineers into. I literally went to the head of engineering and said, who's the best engineers you've got that are going to shred this framework if we build something? and he threw 2 or 3 at me, and they were so passionate, they were so awesome, that in my first week or two, one of the top engineers, Kit, she joined us just recently from realestate.com, literally said, Cam, this is so exciting, can we pair up on this? And we paired up on it for like 3 or 4 hours straight, and she really taught me some incredible stuff as well. And yeah, total shock. We were genuinely shocked, but across all metrics, it was just a superior framework, from speed to stability to obviously great for the Bunnings application. It was just the clear winner. So what did we do? We started to reimagine CAF. You know, I didn't want to build CAF that we just built at Tab, but a lot of the team liked the idea of CAF. So I wanted to say, let's, as a team, work out what that looks like from scratch. And as you can see, it's quite a different ball game. CAF at Tabcorp, we leverage the npm.js. The pros, easy to install, direct from the npm.js. npm install, Tabcorp, blah, blah, blah. Quickest approach to getting a CAF in place. We felt like it was a pretty quick way to do it. Really hard to debug. If you npm installed that in and then had to debug that underlying CAF, you had to do some pretty crazy stuff to get there, and it was a pain in the butt. Managing access, as the admin of the project, I had to constantly be managing access to who could actually access the npm.js module. And dependencies. A common framework in npm.js, if you go into npm.js and look that up now, super uncommon. And because of that, certain packages are literally not designed for actually when you npm install a framework into a project. And we found by doing this approach, like Cucumber could update the actual framework, and it would literally break our entire suite and any project on it, because it would introduce some sort of, e.g. class or abstraction, that it just wasn't expecting to have to deal with when you had a project calling a framework from another project. Some of the big challenges, particularly debugging, that was an absolute pain. Cucumber Playwright TypeScript, where we landed at Bunnings, we actually leveraged Docker and we set it up as a separate container. So we actually run a Docker Compose up that pulls in the common framework in a separate repo, and effectively we direct any paths at that project, but we never touch npm.js. And this was huge. No more issues with node packages, so much easier to debug and run the tests, no need to worry about team accesses. The only cons we found was there was a bit of a learning curve with Docker. You know, if you haven't used Docker, you have to learn Docker, you have to understand the Docker Compose up, the different scripts, how it works. And yeah, Docker can be intimidating, particularly for new people, junior testers that are less technical. Using it for the first time can be a little intimidating. We got over that hump recently by actually doing a series of videos that we actually get people to do, because what we realized was as the team was getting bigger, we were constantly just redoing workshops on how to get it all running and going, and we're like, well, why don't we put this in a video, almost like a course. It's a 2-hour video, new team members do it, they get set up on their machine, and it's actually now part of the onboarding course, and we think that's really cool, like a cool way to be introduced to the tech stack. So what did some of that reimagining look like? You know, you got to think that original CAF we did, it was so simple. It's just generic step definitions and support functions. That was all it was. But this one, particularly with getting that extra engineering buy-in and at a much greater scale, instead of just being sort of one project, we had the entire digital team that was there at the time and the engineers there. We started to think about Cucumber World to enable segregated host page and element mappings for each scenario. Has anyone heard of Cucumber World? Awesome. So for those that haven't, it's just it's basically a part of the Cucumber framework that enables you to run all your tests in segregation. So, you know, back in the day before it existed, if you tried to run 2 tests in parallel and one was updating in a global environment variable and the second one leveraged that same global environment variable to assert on a result, e.g. maybe you stored the balance of your balance at the start of a transaction and then asserted after a $5 buy. Before Cucumber World, that if they were running at the same time, that environment variable would be updated across both. Cucumber World means it's completely segregated, which is really powerful when running in parallel. We leveraged Cucumber World to enable segregated, sorry, that's an error on my half, but Babel for TS basically enabled us to, Cucumber's still actually relying on JS. It hasn't been fully converted over to TypeScript. So basically we used Babel to convert over TS to JS to enable Cucumber and Cucumber World to work with the latest version of Playwright and TypeScript, enabling, I believe, one of the very first Cucumber Playwright TypeScript frameworks in the world. And we had to do that completely from scratch with our own learnings. You could not Google it. And I also think, why I'll speak to it a little later, the course I put out was a bestseller for 2 years on this subject, because people would literally go Cucumber Playwright tutorial in Google, and the only thing that would come up would be the course in Udemy I had up there. Initializing mapping, so we leverage Cucumber World to enable segregate. Wow, what did I do with that? That's a bug right there. But basically, initializing mappings, the old way of doing it, we grab a mapping out of those page.jsons every single time. What we did here was we initialized all our mappings at the start of the suite, and then the suite had them already set up in an object structure, ready to rock and roll based on whatever parameter you put in Cucumber. And that meant much faster tests. Across 10 tests, when we made that change, we saw a significant speed improvement. And I highly recommend initializing mappings at runtime in that fashion. Dynamic pages, so we created a function that determined what page we are on from pages.json based on the URL regex matching our defined page. Yeah, so we didn't even have to determine what page we're on anymore. We'd actually define our page routes in JSON payloads, and depending on the page you were on, it would tell the framework, hey, it looks like you've got a /login in your routes. That must mean you're on the login page. So we never had to actually define that as a step anymore, which is pretty powerful. So you could literally be like, given I am on the home page, to go to the home page, you could go when I da-da-da, then I da-da-da, and I da-da-da, and you never have to actually physically update the page in the framework. It would do it all for you and know where to actually draw down your mappings from. Generic steps, we created a function that determines what page we were on from JSON based on, I don't know what I was doing there. It's the same thing again. I apologise for that, but luckily I know it off the top of my head. But generic steps, we continue to leverage generic steps once again, and reusable functions. Every single function was reusable in the framework. So we built a framework that is so architecturally sound, we can literally substitute out Playwright for Selenium, not losing any tests, step definitions, or functions. So I built this little app as well for a bit of fun. I call it the Bunnings Simple Reactor. And it's super powerful, and I'll tell you why. It has every single basically component you'd expect in a either React application or whatnot, and it allows us to execute every single step definition in the CAF in 45 seconds instead of what it could take against a real application. So the reason I actually built it was because when I tried to execute and validate all the different step definitions were working in the bunnings.com.au application, because of the nature of the tests, what it took to get through every step, it would take 45 minutes. By building this little app, which probably only took a couple of days to build, if you click on Playground, it's got all the different components as well, like radio buttons, etc., 45 seconds. And we can run that on every pull request or change to the common framework. So literally, if you update a step in the common framework, it's going to run a pull request, spin up this app, run all the tests, all the step definitions, and validate that your framework's still 100% functional before it goes out to all the other projects, which is pretty cool. As you can see on the right, exactly the same framework, folder structure, step definitions. The only difference here is literally the Selenium functions or the Playwright functions. Thus, you can have a pretty amazing proof of concept. You can literally prove with the exact same code, only changing out the underlying framework, which is better. And that enabled us to do this. So we basically could run the same test, same framework, just minor difference being Playwright or Selenium. Who's going to win? So what we found with that was obviously Playwright was the clear winner, not just against Cypress, but also Selenium. It also handled a lot better and was much more stable. And I don't want to reiterate too much, but this is why I'm doing it as well, is that a lot of the same principles are in play again. Passion, proof of concept, leader on the tool, showcases, team buy-in. The biggest difference with Bunnings was team desires. You know, I knew when I met the team, and I tried to meet everyone in my first week or two, that they were massive on architecture, massive on code. And the Bunnings team, particularly when I joined, was so exciting because they had invested in local talent and brought in the best they could find right across the industry. You know, coming from Tabcorp, you know, a lot of long-standing team members. Coming into Bunnings, it was like every person you met was like from some cool startup or some well-known company, had some sort of track record, had done something really incredible. And so for me, I knew that architecture was something that they were really passionate about, and if I gravitated towards the importance of that and we built something amazing together, that everyone would get on board. So the framework, I'm not trying to sell it by any means here. I literally just wanted to prove that it is a consumable framework. So as I say, I put it up on Udemy. I think it's been on the bestseller list for nearly 2 years now. It's been actually a fascinating experience. I'd never put a course online before. It took a long time to record. That was probably the first thing that shocked me. I sort of started, and as I continued to build out sort of a script in PowerPoint, it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it ended up being 33 hours, which I don't know if you've ever tried to edit 33 hours of looking at yourself. It's not easy. Like, you're looking at yourself talking, and it's tough. So it was a long journey, and hundreds of hours went into it. But the feedback I'm getting is that what's incredible is what I've discussed today, which is it's a full-fledged framework that you can literally copy and paste pretty much into your own project and get started and get into it. The reason I did 2 was because I also wanted to prove that they are the exact same thing. The only difference is Playwright is one and Selenium is the other. So if you literally checked out both, it's almost like I'm saying the exact same thing. It's just I'm speaking to Selenium in one round of the course and Playwright in the other. Some great learnings as well. I realised like I can't take reviews too personal. You get like 5 great reviews, 5-star, and then you get 1-star review from a guy that took the course for 1 hour and just tells you to get stuffed. So that was it. I took that personal at first. I'd like try and chase him down on LinkedIn. Like, dude, what's up with the 1-star review? Thought that was a bit rough. But I realised that that's just what people do. And sometimes people will pick up something and not like it, and just the same, some people will pick up something and absolutely love it. Any questions, guys?